In the vast expanse of the universe, humanity had always been the underdog. Fragile creatures made of soft flesh and brittle bones, venturing into the unknown with nothing but their ingenuity and sheer will to survive. Among the countless species scattered across the stars, humanity's resilience was often overlooked, dismissed as insignificant in the face of advanced alien civilizations. The Khans, a species of towering arthropod-like aliens, were no exception. They saw humans as weak, laughable even, with their lack of natural armor and their seemingly fragile forms. But that perception was about to change in ways they couldn't have imagined. Lieutenant Sarah Chen sat cross-legged on the cold, metallic floor of her cell. Her dark eyes studied every detail of her surroundings with an unsettling intensity. Behind the shimmering energy barrier that confined her, the Kexan guards chittered among themselves, their mandibles clicking in what passed for laughter. Sarah's capture had been a stroke of luck for them, or so they thought. During a raid on a human base in the Centauri system, she had been the sole survivor of her squad, her capture celebrated as a major victory by the Kexan forces. Such fragile creatures, rasped the guard captain in heavily accented Standard, the universal language shared by spacefaring species. He gestured with one of his three-fingered claws towards Sarah. "How did your kind ever make it to the stars?" Sarah's mind raced as the alien guard finally retreated from her cell, the heavy thud of their carapaced feet echoing down the sterile corridor. Alone again, she let out a shaky breath, her fingers running over the smooth surface of the metallic tray in her lap. It wasn't just a food tray anymore, it was her ticket out. Every scratch and polish she'd made to its surface was calculated, a step in the grand plan she had been constructing since the moment she was thrown into this cell. Her calm exterior belied the storm of thoughts raging within. What they saw as submission was nothing more than strategy. She knew they underestimated her, and that was exactly what she needed. Her thoughts flicked back to the ambush on Centauri 3, the desperate cries of her squad echoing in her memory. She'd been trained to endure loss, to compartmentalize, but those faces haunted her, their voices fueled her resolve. Sarah Chen, sole survivor, didn't have the luxury of breaking down. If humanity had taught her one thing, it was that survival meant adaptation. And right now, adapting meant becoming something the Kthans couldn't predict. The Kthans themselves were a paradox. They exuded an air of superiority with their towering forms and armored exoskeletons, but Sarah had studied them long enough to notice the cracks in that facade. They were rigid, both in body and in thought, reliant on brute force and numbers. It made sense. The evolution on a high-gravity world had molded them into a race of powerhouses, where survival meant outmuscling everything else. But Sarah came from Earth, a planet where survival often meant outthinking the competition. It was a lesson she intended to teach them. The energy barrier that contained her flickered faintly every few hours. At first, it seemed like a random occurrence, but Sarah had noted the timing, counting the seconds of the flicker until she was certain of the maintenance cycle. That was her window, and she would only get one shot. Her fingers tightened around the tray, its edges sharpened into a makeshift blade. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Timing and precision would do the rest. Across the hall, other cells held prisoners of various species, most slumped in defeat. Sarah had tried to make eye contact with a few during her first days, but the Kstan's cruelty had stripped them of hope. Her resolve hardened. If she could escape, she'd make sure the others had a chance too. She'd learned enough of the alien systems to know that their network wasn't as impenetrable as they thought. The arrogance of their design would be their undoing. The alien guards were methodical in their routines. They rotated every 6 hours, and Sarah had learned to predict their movements to the second. Tonight's rotation was the weakest, a trio of younger Khans who seemed more interested in boasting to one another than actually keeping watch. Sarah had spent the past few days practicing in her mind, visualizing every move. She'd never have the raw strength to overpower them directly, but strength wasn't her weapon. Precision was. Her pulse quickened as the flicker in the barrier approached. She kept her breathing steady, her movements deliberate. Timing was everything. When the moment came, she angled the tray just so, catching the harsh overhead light and reflecting it toward the sensor panel that controlled the barrier. The sudden burst of light overloaded the panel, causing the barrier to sputter and collapse. She moved instantly, slipping through the opening before the guards could react. Chaos erupted as she struck the first guard, using the sharpened edge of her tray to exploit the weak joint at his neck. He collapsed with a gurgling chitter, and she turned to the second, dodging his clumsy swipe and striking at the vulnerable spots she had memorized. Her zero-gravity combat training made her movements fluid and unpredictable, a stark contrast to their brute force. By the time the third guard raised his weapon, Sarah had already disarmed him, using his own bulk to shield herself from the plasma bolt that ricocheted off the wall. Her heart pounded as she grabbed the plasma rifle, its alien design awkward in her hands but functional enough. She didn't stop to savor the moment. There was no time. Alarms blared through the facility, a grating sound that spurred her into action. She needed to move fast. As she navigated the corridors, her mind worked to recall the layout she'd pieced together from glimpses during her capture and hints from guard conversations. The central command room was her target. If she could disable their systems, she'd have a fighting chance to free the other prisoners and cause enough disruption to escape. The clans were in disarray. They hadn't anticipated resistance from a human, let alone one as methodical and unyielding as Sarah. Their shouts and clicks echoed through the halls, but she stayed one step ahead, using the shadows and their blind spots to her advantage. She'd studied their biology long enough to know their weaknesses, how their compound eyes struggled with sudden changes in light, how their rigid forms limited their range of motion. Every observation became a tool in her arsenal. Reaching the command room, Sarah quickly dispatched the two guards stationed there, her movements swift and efficient. The room was a hub of alien technology, its consoles glowing with unfamiliar symbols. But Sarah had always been quick to learn. She scanned the controls, her fingers flying over the interfaces as she accessed the prison's systems. With a few calculated inputs, she disabled the energy barriers of the other cells and triggered a facility-wide lockdown to prevent reinforcements from arriving. The prisoners were free. Chaos erupted as the mix of alien captives took their chance to fight back against their captors. Sarah's actions had sparked a rebellion, one that spread through the facility like wildfire. But her mission wasn't over yet. She needed to access the tactical databases stored in the command room, information that could turn the tide of the war against the clans. Her hands trembled as she downloaded the data onto a stolen device. The sound of approaching guards grew louder, but she didn't falter. She'd come too far to stop now. As the download completed, she grabbed the device and turned to face the doorway, a stolen plasma rifle at the ready. The first guard to enter fell to a precise shot, his mandibles clicking in a final futile warning. Sarah didn't wait for the others. She moved, her body a blur of calculated motion as she fought her way out of the command room and toward the hangar bay. The stolen data was clutched tightly in her hand, a beacon of hope for humanity's resistance. The hangar was a chaotic scene. Free prisoners clashed with guards, the sound of alien weapons and shouts filling the air. Sarah spotted a shuttle, its engines idling as if waiting for her. She sprinted toward it, dodging plasma fire and leaping over fallen bodies. The sight of the open ramp was a promise of freedom, but the fight was far from over. As she reached the shuttle, a towering clan guard blocked her path, his mandibles clicking in a menacing challenge. Sarah squared her shoulders, her grip tightening on the plasma rifle. She had no choice but to face him head-on. Her mind raced, analyzing his movements, searching for an opening. This was the moment her training, her observations, and her sheer will would be put to the ultimate test. The other guards clicked their approval, their iridescent carapaces glinting under the harsh prison lights. To them, Sarah was nothing more than an amusing anomaly, a curiosity to mock while they waited for their next orders. But Sarah didn't flinch at their derision. She sat motionless, her expression calm, almost serene. What the clans failed to realize was that the very qualities they mocked were the ones that made humanity dangerous. Sarah had spent the past 7 days in captivity observing everything: the guard rotations, the slight flicker in the energy barrier during its maintenance cycles, and most importantly, the clans themselves. Their rigid exoskeletons gave them immense strength but limited flexibility. Their compound eyes, though excellent for peripheral vision, struggled to adjust to rapid changes in light. These weren't just idle observations, they were pieces of a puzzle Sarah was methodically assembling. The clans had assumed she would break during interrogation, as so many others had. They underestimated her resolve, her ability to think, adapt, and plan. While they jeered and laughed, Sarah's mind was working at a relentless pace, analyzing every possible scenario. She had no intention of remaining a captive. More importantly, she had no intention of letting the Cthulhu's arrogance go unchallenged. On the seventh night, during the midnight shift change, Sarah made her move. The energy barrier's flicker was brief but predictable, a vulnerability she had spent days timing down to the millisecond. In preparation, she had scratched her metallic food tray against the floor, fashioning it into a crude but reflective surface. When the barrier cycled for maintenance, she angled the tray to catch the overhead lights, creating a strobing effect that disoriented the guards. Their compound eyes couldn't handle the sudden burst of light and shadow, leaving them momentarily stunned. In that fleeting moment of confusion, Sarah struck. Years of zero-gravity combat training had taught her how to generate maximum force with minimal leverage. She targeted the joints of the first guard's exoskeleton, exploiting the weak points she had meticulously identified. The guard collapsed with a chittering shriek, his claws scrabbling uselessly at the air. The second guard barely had time to react before Sarah used his own momentum against him, sending him crashing into the third. Their carapaces cracked loudly against each other, the sound echoing through the prison corridors. By the time the guard captain sounded the alarm, Sarah had already acquired one of their plasma rifles. The weapon wasn't designed for human hands, but Sarah had spent her captivity mentally rehearsing how to modify her grip. The rifle felt awkward but functional as she leveled it at the approaching reinforcements. The captain's mandibles clicked furiously. Impossible. You were contained. Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. Your first mistake was assuming I'm less dangerous because I'm smaller. Your second mistake was giving me time to think. The prison erupted into chaos. Alarms blared, and the metallic clang of Khan warriors' footsteps echoed through the facility. But Sarah didn't panic. She moved with precision, using the guards' own security systems against them. Surveillance cameras became her eyes, locked doors her shields. She released other prisoners, human and alien alike, turning them into a chaotic force that overwhelmed the Cthulhu's rigid command structure. As Sarah fought her way toward the hangar, she accessed the prison's tactical database, downloading critical military intelligence onto a stolen data pad. By the time she reached a shuttle and launched into the starry expanse, the prison was in shambles. The once mocking laughter of the Cthulhu's had been replaced with panicked clicks and the hum of failing systems. Word of Sarah's escape spread quickly, becoming a legend among both humans and Cthulhu's. For the humans, she was a symbol of resilience, proof that even in the darkest moments, ingenuity and determination could prevail. For the Cthulhu's, she was a living nightmare, a reminder that underestimating humanity could have catastrophic consequences.